and a very warm welcome to you all this evening from southwest France. It's just getting dark. It's been about 20 degrees here today, which is extremely pleasant. And I've been working up in my writer's hut, which is lovely. I have a lovely view over the valley and the woods. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Sally Goerner to our platform this evening. I first came across Sally about 20 years ago when I reviewed her excellent book called After the Clockwork Universe. And so since then, I've been sort of trying to follow her work, and a mutual friend put us in touch. And so we've got her speaking this evening on energy system sciences, which I think is incredibly important at this particular juncture in our evolution. When Sally refers to a collaborative learning species, that's exactly what we need to put into practice. And to have a civilization, a future civilization that is life-enhancing rather than sterile and controlling. And what you'll find, you probably saw this in the biography, that Sally has degrees in engineering, systems physics, and psychology. So it's incredible interdisciplinary training. And she tells me that although she's research director for Edinburgh University's Planetary Health Lab, she hasn't been able to go to Edinburgh for a year at least. And she also works in regenerative economics and is a former science advisor to the Capital Institute. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on the cusp of great change, how science 2.0, or maybe we need 3.0, but anyway, 2.0 will certainly be an improvement, can support a new enlightenment. Sally, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I appreciate it. Can I put my slides up now?
You can indeed.
Okay, actually, I'm going to start off with a little context because what I'm going to be talking about is rather a large topic, and it's very interdisciplinary. And so how did I get into this kind of thing? I started out as a normal engineer. I was doing high-tech R&D in the 80s. I worked on the space shuttle and cruise missiles for McDonnell Douglas, and early desktop computers for NCR Corporation, and early cell phones and digital switches for Bell Northern Research Labs. But it really wasn't my calling, and I was hanging around with lots of people for whom it was their calling. So I went back to school in psychology and had a wonderful time learning all sorts of things about psychology and the human condition. And then I had an existential crisis because, of course, the engineer in me is still very empirically based in math and science and rigor and all that kind of stuff. And the science that was going on in psychology was, woo, it was kind of like, I'd see an abstract here and it was very interesting. And then you'd read the body of the paper and it had very much nothing to do with what their conclusions were, either in the abstract or the end, the beginning or the end. So after my degree, I finished my degree there. I went off searching for, why isn't psychology a science, or what is science, or is there a kind of science that would actually would be amenable to things that we know in the human condition, which most of classical physics is not. So I was searching around and came across this place called the Saybrook Institute in San Francisco. And its byline is, we're looking for a few good mavericks. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting place. And so I signed up to get another PhD. This is the one in systems physics. And discovered a little enclave of heretical scientists who put me in touch with the fact that people have been rethinking the traditional mechanistic, reductionistic, analytic kind of science for decades and decades. And that, so my degree ended up being in a combination of nonlinear dynamics, also known as chaos theory, and non-equilibrium thermodynamics. But the most important thing was that what you found with energy was that it follows universal patterns, universal laws that are somewhat predictable. It produces geometrically precise patterns that are like snowflakes, so that they're both universal, precise, geometrically precise, but infinitely unique, which actually fits more of the human condition than either the traditional statistics or traditional determinism. So so I PhD on how energy flow science or physics of flow fits with, creates this new version of evolution, which goes from the origins of matter to the latest cycles of civilization. And great, got my PhD, and published it as a book. And then I found this really interesting phenomenon, which was people all over the world saying, how does this stuff must work in my field too? And so I got invited to all those. I mean, I've literally been to Toronto to Tokyo and I don't know, Boston to Berlin and Oslo to Orlando. And in every one of those fields that I went into, there was some small percentage of the people who would come up after the talk and tell me how people in their field had already been finding these kinds of things in their own life, in their own work, and that it was well documented, and it wasn't, it wasn't just hand wavy or crazy. It was all very serious and well documented. So I started on my quest to become an integrator of all of this kind of work, because for me, the scientists that I found were the new scientific heretics. They're the ones creating a new stage of science, and it's not only just about systems or complexity or or resilience or regeneration, which are all new names for the same basic goal of pursuing how complex systems work. But it's fundamentally, they're all going to be, I think, well, okay, energy becomes an empirical basis for all of those kinds of things. It already is for some of them. I mean, resilience is really a variation of energy systems theory. But more importantly, eerily enough, all over the world in every field I've been to, and I've been through advertising to urban planning and all points in between, you find that people are already reinventing their fields in line with this kind of thinking, without having any idea that this kind of thinking is out there to legitimize and validate and that unify and add rigor to what they're already trying to do. So I'm here today because I think the science can basically support this new enlightenment that's already happening, by making it, again, logical, practical, rigorous, and heartwarming at the same time. Those are my big things. So basically what I'm going to do here is go through a smattering of what I have learned. Okay, so let's share now. Hold on. Okay, so we have does it work now?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, good. All right. So we're not only on the cusp of great change, but what I hope to come out of it is a logical, practical, rigorous, and heartwarming approach to building a sustainably vibrant society. Okay, so the first thing energy does is it gives you a way of understanding societal learning driven by pressure. So in this view, the reason I found all of those people was because in every field imaginable and all over the world, our systemic problems are driving people to develop reforms. So the fact that we've gone through this kind of great change, this societal metamorphosis built around more reliable worldview, is something that I was introduced by a British BBC historian named James Burke, who did a series of programs called The Day the Universe Changed, which is really fast, recommended if you can find them. Anyway, he noted that all aspects of in the shift between the medieval to the modern era, there was actually, it's kind of like a paradigm shift happening on all different dimensions. It happened in family relations and economic relations and social structures and art, and everything changed in sync along with this. So with the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment joined up, actually with the Renaissance and the Reformation too, to create this massive change in the whole entire social structure, such that somebody going to bed and or waking up in the year 1500 saw a completely different, an educated person saw a completely different universe than somebody waking up in the early 17 and dawn of 1700. And what I'm postulating is essentially we're going through that same kind of process again, and this time, what do we call it? I have previously called it the integral era because that's what I got from some of the people writing back when I was first working on this stuff. I'm beginning to think, as we'll see, that we need to kind of refine that a bit more. But anyway, so what we'll have is a science that is based on a new approach to science, which is more systemically oriented, and a new approach to society, which is, again, we're going to find out that human beings are more properly understood as a collaborative learning species. That's why we talk and build scientific theories, because our primary mode of survival is to pool information, forge new hypotheses about how the world works, and then change our behavior rapidly by changing our beliefs. So we are actually designed to change ourselves and the world by changing how we view the world. And this is pretty, I mean, that's really different from what currently dominates from the evolutionary theory of Darwin, where we're, selfish beats it, or sort of it's all about survival of the fittest, and it's very individualistic oriented and so on and so forth. Anyway, the way these S-curve cycles work, they're actually cycles of development. So that if you look back historically, what happens is they start out with this noble idea. So that if you look at the medieval world, it emerged out of the ashes of the Dark Ages and the Roman ruin. But they were going to build God's design on Earth, God's city on Earth, and it was never complete, beautiful wonderfulness, but it actually had some substance to it, and it brought people together to work together around these new ways of thinking at that time. But over time, it becomes more concentrated and more corrupt, because the people with power tend to recast everything more along their own points of view, in ways that are beneficial to them. So in the end, the corruption of the original medieval God's design view gave way to a new upstart, where you had the new set of heretics and a new set of both scientific and social, and they came together around the metaphor of a clockwork universe, an orderly system whose laws could be understood by reason and empiricism. Unfortunately, the noble vision there was really more about democracy and liberty and freedom and civil rights and the rights of man and things like that. And we've made progress towards those, but our institutions have become so corrupt again that we are now experiencing these kind of interlocking global systemic crises. I mean, it's energy and it's education and it's agriculture and water and economics and environment and corruption and social unrest, and everything is all kind of wound up together. So there's a question in these S-curve kind of cycles, these developmental cycles. You can never tell whether it's going to actually succeed. So there is on the cusp of great change, we don't know whether our new worldview is going to come together in time to actually make the leap to a new stage of society or civilization, which is where for me, having the science behind it that helps, again, unify, clarify, and add rigor and detail to the work that's already happening is really helpful to, hope will help us manage to succeed in making this transition rather than going down the downside of the curve towards regression and collapse. Okay, so again, in my point of view, our root problem is behind all of our intersecting systemic crises is cultural. It's oligarchy as a self-serving power system, or as Aristotle has said, it's governed by the rich for their own advantage. In our case, it's oligarchic capitalism, but which has sort of usurped free enterprise democracy and turned it into something completely different. Anyway, so oligarchy is problematic because as a culture, it's an equal opportunity corrupter. You have elites rig the system to their advantage, regardless of the cost to other people. You have institutionalized unfairness with advantage and impunity for some and exploitation and injustice for others. You have a master-slave mentality where superiority gives some people the right to exploit others. You have coercive conformity where you have concentrated power used for leverage, control, threat, and fear. And it tends to distort information and block reforms that are in any way antithetical to what is good for the people currently in power. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is sort of go through the basics of how the full story of energy creates a new Copernican flip. So here again, humanity is a collaborative learning species, and in order to get our societies to work, to become sustainably vibrant, we need to have a systemic approach to systemic health that reconnects head, heart, hands, and power. And in this, I use 4 basic elements for systemic health: collaborative learning, common cause culture, resilient structure, and regenerative circulation. Okay, so where did these come from? So the other thing that the full story of energy does is it says we are in an endlessly creative, order-producing cosmos that nevertheless follows universal laws and produces precise patterns. Okay, so the easiest and the most fundamental of these laws is self-organization. Self-organization is an energy flow process of development, of emergence, if you will. And it follows three main rules. That there's really a fourth that I'm not going to go into, but pressure drives, diversity seeds, and energy fuels. So if you take the example of boiling water, you start without a nice pot with no heat under it, and the molecules are colliding randomly. You turn up the heat, the molecules start going faster and faster until they literally cannot go any faster in that pattern of organization. And then they start forming little relatively hot pockets, little bubbles that will move up the side. And eventually one will move all the way up to the top and lose its heat, and it will trigger this a change of state, a change of organizational pattern from just random collisions to little circular rolls that move energy faster, because that's basically what energy under pressure tries to do, is it tries to move faster, and it creates organization to do so. And then the process will repeat. So the little circular cells will go faster and faster until they can't go any faster, and some little naturally occurring bit of diversity, a little quirk of an inhomogeneity or speck of dust will trigger another change where it's a figure 8, because smaller things are faster, and so each time you'll get a new stage of circulation and organization that moves energy faster. And each time it does this, it produces something new. Now, the same kind of pattern is obviously seen in hurricanes, which is the figure on the left. And it's also seen in the origins of life in primordial Earth, which is the figure on the right. And it's also seen in innovation cycles, and where you get pressure in terms of unmet needs or economic demand. It links up with diversity in the form of somebody's new idea. And when those are fueled by money, it gets turned into business and a whole new pattern of organization and industry. Okay, if energy is at the basis of anything, then economies are a type of flow network. And the thing about flow networks is their entire existence depends upon the circulation of energy, resources, and information to all parts of the whole. So if that's true, then one of the four main rules of systemic health for an economy is circulate robustly, invest regeneratively, which is in the internal infrastructure and mechanisms for your own continuation, and maintain reliable inputs and healthy outputs. Now, the last two are really basically sustainability in a nutshell, where, you know, if you exhaust all of your fuel or your water or you pollute your air, you will collapse. So those four main laws are essentially all come out of the fact that economies are a type of flow network. Okay, so flow networks also requires internal structures, because like with your circulatory system, you have to have these channels whereby circulation gets to all the parts in distant places and down to every nook and cranny. So, and in order to get to have optimal circulation, you need a balance of small, medium, and large systems, because you need the big guys to go really rapidly across distances, and you need the medium and the small guys to get to every little nook and cranny. So this explains why hierarchical systems that we see all over the world and in all kinds of systems are basically fractals. They're a balance of a few bigger, more efficient guys on top and many smaller, more numerous, resilient ones on the bottom. And you see that river deltas and leaves and cities and lungs and circulatory systems. And so I also like to point out that this leads to the rule both for banking and in cities, which needs organizations that are just right to serve its needs. So for instance, you will need big banks to serve the needs for large scale needs, because the small scale, serving small scale needs is uneconomic for very large institutions. You need regional banks to support regional networks, and you need small scale banks that support small scale commerce, knows the customer and the community, invested in the success of the loan, which is not true today, essentially. So we also find that life is an inseparable mind-body integration. So in this view, the original cell's metabolism, the things that it allows it to process energy and make things, process resources for energy to make things move, is done through the self-organization part. But then you have information, which is also seen as an energy trail, basically a photon of light, which we see as seeing, and or a chemical gradient we describe as smell. And what happens in the original early primitive cells is that, say a cell accidentally swallowed a photon and it interacted with the internal metabolisms that actually, in a way that propelled it towards a new source of fuel, which is we now call food. If that happens, that's basically primordial intelligence, because now you have a functional response to a functional, if accidental, response to information. Once that happens, life, primarily for its ability to respond functionally to information, because that's how it keeps finding more food in essence. So in this kind of situation, you're going to need accurate information, and an intelligent response are going to be essential to health. Okay, so the last part is that the cosmos creates intricacy, which are smaller parts connected by lace-like networks of connective tissue. Okay, so if you're in a flow network, that you get big, you're held together by bonds, and the bigger you grow, the more those bonds get stretched until they literally reach a breaking point, which is at actually mathematically precise place relative to the surface and the volume. All right. So the only way to get bigger is to break into two smaller pieces, which is what you see in an embryo, two smaller systems that then couple back together in some kind of interconnected way. Okay, so you see this same process in the evolution of the nervous system, because, all right, if you're a multicellular organism and you get bigger, as you grow, first you can just, you know, osmose some chemical gradient, or you can discharge an electrical charge, and you'll be able to keep in sync or communicate with your fellow cells that way. But as you get bigger, that's no longer possible because you are no longer in actual contact with all of your fellow cells. So eventually, some multicellular organisms develop a nerve cell, which his whole job is to keep things connected and in sync by spreading information around internally so that you can stay in sync again. This process repeats until you get multiple nerve cells, and eventually you have so many nerve cells you have a Tower of Babel, and you need to invent a brain with a nervous system, or the brain with a nervous system comes out, and the brain's job is to find patterns within all of this information floating across all of these spaces. So in this view, that pressure stay connected drove advances in communication, coordination, intelligence, and abilities. Now, okay, so life becomes more complex then by collaborating. And in living systems, so because they're doing it intelligently in some sense, they're doing it because intelligently involved. So this slide is from Lynn Margulis, who is an evolutionary biologist who has long promoted the theory of serial symbiosis. I keep wondering, I wish I could ask how many people have heard of these kinds of things, because these are pretty old and well established. If you look at the early complex cells, the eukaryotes, there's now evidence that the DNA evidence says that some organelles were actually previously separate life forms. So that the mitochondria were really respiring bacteria that used to be separate prokaryotes, and the spirochetes became the flagella and things like that. So first you have archaic bacteria coming together into a unified host cell called a eukaryote. The eukaryotes come together into complex multicellulars called animals, fungi, algae, and plants. Animals come together in herds and collectives and flocks and things like that, all because of the same kind of thing. You can do more when you work together than you can when you're all on your own. Okay, the same pattern is, of course, seen in the evolution of human systems, where you start with foraging hominid pods, where they don't really have much communication and they're essentially one with nature. You move on to hunting tribes, where they'll have more coordination for hunting and beating the bushes and throwing rocks down on the mammoth and things like that. You get some more sophistication and you get sedentary agrarian villages, but they'll have councils and clans and many more social relationships. You get to hierarchical societies, and they have incredible different structures and for coordination and information gathering and things like that. So the question now is that whether we're going to be able to make a new big leap. So this may be the end not only of the 400 years of modern society, but maybe the 5,000 years of oligarchic hierarchies. And that's really a question. And the problem here is that hierarchies are necessary for groups beyond a certain size, but oligarchic beliefs make them socially destructive. Okay, so to sum up, evolution is an energy-driven process of growth and development that runs from the origins of matter, really, with plasma and protons, neutrons, and atoms, to the evolution of living systems, collaborative learning systems, and consciously learning systems. All right. The most important thing about realizing that we are a collaborative learning species is that it frees us to realize that we are designed to change ourselves in the world by learning better ways, and that how we see the world determines how we live in it. Now, this is kind of like social construction of reality kinds of theories all fit into this kind of bailiwick. But this means that we need to really seriously question some of our assumptions, particularly in classical science. Darwinism is kind of, for me, a limited view approach to evolution. Classical physics, well, there's just an endless number of things that we need to start rethinking and questioning whether they have a right interpretation. Somebody can ask me about entropy in the second law sometime, and because that was also part of my dissertation. Anyway, so how do we build a sustainably vibrant civilization? Well, we need to reconnect head, heart, and hands, and power. So if you sum it up, all the things we just went through, we need to circulate robustly, invest regeneratively, distribute fairly, learn collaboratively, institutionalize common cause values, and maintain diversity, balance, and intricacy, and avoid extremes because they cause instability. Now, of course, my main thesis is that oligarchies fail because they violate all the laws of systemic health. They extract more than instead of circulating and reinvesting, they extract, concentrate, and speculate. They distribute unfairly, they stifle learning, they promote selfishness, and their imbalances breed instability. So I have to read this is my favorite quote from Jared Diamond after studying numerous societal collapses. He says, "Societies aren't murdered, they commit suicide, they slit their wrists, and in the course of many decades stand by passively and watch themselves bleed to death." And we do appear to be watching ourselves bleed to death now. So what then shall we do? Well, obviously, if we're a collaborative learning species, what we need to do is build a new dream. In this case, we need to teach our head to learn, our heart to care, our hands to do, and how to keep power to keep the whole safe and strong. Now, another one of my favorite quotes this is an elder of the Ecuador Shuar tribe, but it was in a book on the Confessions of an Economic Hitman by an American named Edgar Perkins. And he says, so the elder says, "Your people dreamed of huge factories, tall buildings, as many cars as there are raindrops in the river. Now you begin to see that your dream is a nightmare. How might we make things better? That's simple. All you have to do is change the dream. You need only plant a different seed, teach your children to dream new dreams." Now, as I've said, I've seen work in business and finance and network building, in education, and all of these different things. So there is an Enlightenment 2.0 already at work, and it's already trying to move towards a metamorphosis. What we do now is that we now have a sort of a clearer picture of what we're trying to do. We need to build fractal networks with a healthy balance of sizes. We need proper constraints on excessive size, wealth, influence, and power. We need common cause communities with institutions with fairness, opportunity, and well-being for all. We need diverse, freewheeling, high-quality human capital connected by an intricate meshwork of public goods and services. So among the groups that I worked with was a group that does international educational reform. And they point out that we know how to create empowering education, we just don't do it. Instead, we have these leftover factory model schools, which make learning odious when it doesn't need to be. It makes it meaningless, and it makes, even the people who get through it are often, it's like surviving a long distance run. Anyway, so if you want to have empowered, critical thinking, collaborative citizens, you want to have meaning making and problem solving instead of abstractions and rote, self-confidence instead of inadequacy, thoughtfulness and questioning and instead of obedience, mastery instead of ranking, common cause instead of self-interest, collaborative striving for excellence instead of win-lose competition, critical thinking instead of authority-approved ideas, generative learning, that is actually breaking new grounds instead of prepackaged truth, and you need to honor diversity and community instead of promoting conformity and uniformity. We also sort of need to rediscover or rebuild the democratic free enterprise networks. I grew up in a bunch of small business entrepreneurs. Everybody in my family started a business, of at least one business. And they all had the same feel to them. So they work in partnership networks so that you're aware that you have other people in not only your customers, but your colleagues and the people, in my case, it was a lot of kind of German craftsmen kind of people, but you had other people who knew how to do things, and there was a lot of back and forth and exchanging of information and working together. And it harnessed diverse talents and contributions, and it was self-nourishing, and it invested in people in place, and it valued learning and innovation and honesty, integrity, and ingenuity and know-how, and it gets destroyed by predatory big business. For me, the message is clearly that free enterprise democracy must be fair as well as free. Anyway, we need to institutionalize common cause value, because if you reward people for all of the things that, for maximizing shareholder profit and while by minimizing the well-being of everybody else inside the corporation, then it's just not going to last for very long, which is kind of what we're finding. So we need to emphasize fairness, reciprocity, honesty, mutual integrity, common purpose, and a willingness to learn. All right. So a lot of this is, again, learning is really about preserving the best of the past while progressing to something better. And this is a matter of rediscovering the old and building something new. And for me, what we need to rediscover is the common cause values and servant leadership. And what we need to build is democracy that serves all the people, and enterprise that's fair as well as free. Okay, so I thought I put this one in especially for you guys, because I know consciousness is a big deal. Well, the obvious thing about this view of the cosmos is that we live in a great ordering oneness, and it's just such a clear match for a lot of the ancient wisdoms that I was learning coming up through all of this stuff. So we live in an endlessly creative cosmos that weaves intricate order into every fiber of its being. Underneath the chaos of earthly affairs, the invisible ordering hand that gave rise to all things still shapes us today. The best way to thrive in this universe is to learn rapidly, serve honestly, and live compassionately and in balance with all that is. It's easy to become cynical and despairing in today's age, because so much seems to be going so wrong, and it seems so overwhelmingly complicated to do anything. But I do get hope the same system. There's no reason to believe that we are necessarily going to advance as a species, but our ancestors managed to do the scientific revolution and Enlightenment over much worse odds, and we are so much more sophisticated. People are so much more educated, that I think to the extent that we can articulate our problems more systemically and realize that we have it in us to make these kinds of changes, I find it very hopeful. And of course, for me, one of the things you need to do is also develop more accurate measures of health. So we have I have a group called the Research Alliance for Regenerative Economics, RARE. And we've developed 4 quantitative measures out of using energy systems methods, energy network analysis actually, to measure cross-scale circulation, regenerative investment, reliable inputs, healthy outputs, structural factors about resilience and diversity, about balance, and about intricacy. So that's about it. So for me, the choice is clear. We live in a system that's designed to create wealth for a few, but it's heading downhill. It's committing societal suicide. Our only other choice is to create a vibrant civilization that works for all. So that's it. Any question? Oh no, David's going to say.
No, thank you very much indeed. My goodness, what a tour de force. But maybe
in 45 minutes.
I know, you could stop sharing, and we'll just have a little bit of dialogue before we have a break, I think. And if you would just stop sharing, I'm just going to get something up on the screen, which not on, no, it's just on my own screen, which is a book that I wrote a review of this afternoon, and which is quite relevant. It's called After the Apocalypse by Srečko Horvat, and it's published by Polity. And one of the things that he says here is this, and I think this is what you've just been saying. The choice before us is a stark one. That's my own phrasing. Radical reinvention of the world or mass extinction. Of course, that puts it even more stark.
Yes.
But the radical reinvention, radical collaboration. This is what also Humanity Rising is saying. This is what their radical cooperation, and radical renewal. And regenerative, something that's regenerative. And so I wonder, are you in touch with Meg Wheatley at all?
Oh, I knew Meg Wheatley from aeons ago. So yeah.
Right. Well, as it happens, I've been in Paris this week for an interview, and I had to sort of hole up in a small room, as you could imagine, because you can't go out to dinner anywhere. It's all rather uncivilized. But anyway, there you are. And what she was, I put this into the chat, um, uh, which is a link to an interview in Pioneers of Change. And what struck me as an interesting parallel here was that she was saying that in the evolution of cultures and civilizations, you have this gradual complexification, and then the people in charge try to control this all from the top down. The system becomes corrupt. The control,
Exactly. Right.
as we're seeing at the moment, also includes censorship of non-conforming views, and then you get collapse.
Right.
Uh,
I have I didn't put it up, but because there was only so much time. But I have a great slide on the signs of failing time that I got from a British and archaeologist, Sir Colin Renfrew.
oh yeah, no, I know him.
He wrote this in 1972, and after studying like 26 different countries that collapsed. And one of the signs of failing times is there's an increase in a resurgence of conservatism and fundamentalist religions as the original golden theory is brought back in a corrupted form, which actually serves to accelerate decline.
Well, that's very interesting. So that I suppose one of her questions was how inexorable is this process? And of course, what you're saying is collaborative learning species is that we are designed to take creative advantage of this situation.
Exactly right. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and it is, the nonlinear dynamicist in me says that at tipping points you really literally cannot predict which way it's going to go. So I'm not going to predict it, but I believe that we are collaborative learning species. And my personal experience is that people all over the world in every kind of field imaginable are already working on these kinds of things. They're working on reforming their own field. My favorite example, advertising agencies.
Oh yes.
I gave a talk to agencies in, God, it was probably the early, and what they pointed out is that they've refined this ability to make things flashy and sexy and put them up in splashy places. And that's done is it's turned people out. And so people are actively trying to avoid all of the ads now.
Yes, okay.
And so what they've discovered is that in the old way, if you spend $1 million on advertising and you're Nike, all you'll get is about 80% of the benefit will go to any shoe manufacturer other than you. So Adidas,
Okay.
for instance, will get $800,000 worth of benefit because people say, "Oh, shoe! What shoe shall I get? I'm going to go over here." And what their alternative is to develop what they call a strategic planning, where they essentially try to make the products good so that people have real brand loyalty rather than just flashy brand loyalty. And so they send out a noble purpose worksheet to their clients every year, which asks them to get back in touch with why did you get into this particular field.
How interesting. I remember reading rather a witty definition of an advertising agency, which was 85% confusion and 15% commission. I was also going to ask you about what's very clear at the moment is the aspect of what you're talking about, the self-serving oligarchy, and,
Right.
and this has become more and more clear in the last year, I think. And of course, it's provoked a lot of reaction. I mean, you can see from what's going on, the sort of circulation of ideas on the internet, that people are not at all happy about this. And I'm very interested that there are these dynamic processes going on, in your view, where they are self-limiting, but on the other hand, the power of the lobbies and the corporatocracy and what's now becoming the technocracy is so great that it's hard to see exactly how it's all going to unravel, or how we can help it unravel in that sense without creating chaos.
I'm doing my bit. I'm trying to help it unravel by giving talks like this.
Yes, and did
Some of
you?
it is we need to articulate it. We need to have a consistent articulation of it and see it, because right now people, they don't want to attack free enterprise or democracy, but that's not what's going on here. This is oligarchy, and just under, and the
Yeah,
word
it's
capitalism is a problem.
plutocracy and oligarchy,
Right.
and the concentration is what we're seeing at the moment. But I've been having very much these same thoughts. I was thinking about this on my walk this afternoon. Is this articulation of that some in such a way that it's something that people could get behind, um, and identify with and say, yes, I'd like to work for that.
Exactly, because that's where the noble thing. I mean, I also was it Peter Sorokin, who is
He's such an extraordinary thinker.
yes, but I got a phrase from him called, he believes that great societies always start with a spiritual spur, which is some kind
Yeah.
of greater idea that brings people together to work for a higher common cause.
Well, I think Arnold Toynbee would say the same thing. There's the whole
Yeah,
idea of the creative minority.
yeah.
But Sorokin, for those of you who don't know this, he wrote 4 volumes, which nobody can ever find in any library, called Social and Cultural Dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And then his more accessible work, which I highly recommend to anybody, is The Crisis of Our Age. And then which talks about the different kinds of civilization and culture. And then his great work, apart from that, is called The Ways and Power of Love.
Uh-huh.
And
I
that's
haven't seen
an
that one.
extraordinary book, which was published in 1955, and there was a new edition of it in 2005, published by the Templeton Foundation. And it's one of my go-to books. Not only is the theory so interesting in terms of the different levels and articulations of love, which we've been talking about a lot in our webinars recently, but also he gives a lot of practical examples and stories of people who have acted this out, and it's had a paradoxical result. And I'll just give you one example. There was a woman who a robber came into her flat in Paris to steal some jewelry. And as he was rooting around, she said to him, you know what, the most valuable jewelry is in that drawer over there. And he was so taken aback that he just left the flat.
Huh.
And so in other words, there's some sort of decency and conscience deep down there. If you really confront people, it can create this kind of flip.
Well, okay, so I've been very interested in finding moral values in animals. I don't know if you're familiar with much of this work, but they find that, for instance, they've done these experiments with monkeys where they take, they're all working on some particular task, and all of them are getting grapes for a reward on this particular
Oh,
task.
yes.
But then they take one of them and give them celery instead. and they will have some of these monkeys boycott the task if until everybody gets paid, gets the right grapes for it.
How interesting.
It's so there's all of these things that you don't think of. I mean, we're so indoctrinated with Darwinism, and Darwinism is such a dismal interpretation of the facts. Is what it is from my point of view.
Well, I'll tell you this is another illustrative story. That I had a friend who ran a golf course in Scotland, and there was a site of special natural interest where if you hit a golf ball into it, you weren't allowed to go and get it, because otherwise you'd be disturbing the wildlife. So after a year, there would be an awful lot of golf balls in there. So what happened was that he got a group of boys and girls, I think maybe there were 4 of each, to go in and collect all the balls, and he had a kind of competition as to who could collect the most balls. And so they all spent 10 or 15 minutes there, came out with a whole lot of balls. And what happened is all the boys had their balls individually, but the girls had plotted. So they gave all their bulls to one girl, which meant that they all got a share of the prize. And instead of mix, and I just thought it was such an interesting, different way of thinking, this sort of collaborative way of thinking. And there's an example of your collaborative learning species.
Right. Well, there was one of those animal experiments where they had, and this was actually from, what was it, Tanzania? There's some preserve there where they were studying this particular band of, I think it was chimpanzees, but I could be wrong. But anyway, they had a traditional alpha male hierarchical kind of system. And they, so anytime they came across a kill, the alpha male would eat, or the alpha males would eat everything first, and the women and children would do everything left, get anything that was left. And then they came across some tainted meat, and so the alpha male and his little cohort died. And then when they reconstituted, they had a matriarchal system that was much more egalitarian, and they kept.
Okay.
And they only let, when new males would come in from another tribe or something like that, they would not let them, basically. So they had to be enculturated in the right way.
I'm just going to go to the chat, Doug, because we've got quite a long comment from Merritt Giuliano. Wondering if you would elaborate on free enterprise as a solution, because when people talk about free enterprise, they immediately leap to the current neoliberal, unregulated economic system. I think you're distinguishing fair and free enterprise from what we've now got, because what we have now is not fair, and not even free, actually, since certain industries are regulated. But how do you convince people that we need free and fair enterprise when we need a wide-scale change within the next 10 years? I agree with the need for a regenerative economy, but do we have time to make this happen in time? Also, how does allocation resources play out in your models? And can I just add a rider to that, which is one of the stories that we have at the moment, which I think needs to be modified and changed, is this invisible hand that selfish behavior eventually benefits people, which is only half of Adam Smith. It's his economics rather than his moral philosophy.
I'm not sure I got all of that.
Well,
that was a lot.
It's in the chat, so it's really it's a question about free enterprise, and is the kind of free enterprise can it happen quickly enough in order to stave off the crisis that we have and replace the current neoliberal unregulated economic system, which of course goes back to Reagan and Thatcher in the 80s.
So you, on one of your slides for the upcoming, I don't know if it was the Galileo or one of the other talks, but it talks about grassroots revolution or renaissance. And
that's Colin Tudge.
Okay, so there's a lot of that going on.
Okay.
I mean, so like here, there's a business alliance for local living economies that works to build grassroots, restore kind of local businesses and create them, bring them into networks so that they have economies of scale and advantages, that they have this kind of distributed ownership. And one of the guys on our RARE team is Curtis Ogden he develops partnership networks in farms. So they have, you get together. So in order to compete against the big guys who are just eating everybody's lunch, you get them together, you figure out a way to have some common cause. So you do maybe buying or distributing or even lobbying that you can do on a more mass level, while still having local autonomy in terms of your own farm and your own business and your own kinds of things, maybe adhering to some set of standards. You see this in organic dairy farms in this country, which is actually all over North America. It's in Canada too. So I think there's a race now between the people who are in the grassroots attempting to reorganize and the big guys attempting to just own and control everything. And
yeah, I think that's right. And and also the first system, the big system, they're also still trying to consolidate with one another, with even
Yes.
bigger mergers to create even more power. And you find this particularly in the food system, where about 4 corporations are,
Oh, yeah.
control the whole thing. And so there's a case for decentralization, and breaking these people up rather than consolidating them even further.
Right. So I also see that it's a political solution that's going to make the difference, because right now we're still
Yeah,
subsidizing the big guys, which makes no sense whatsoever.
absolutely, absolutely. I've just got one other kind of rider at this point to ask you, Sally, and that's how do you see the relationship between intricacy and complexity?
Well, okay, so I sort of chafe against complexity as a term because it just makes things seem complicated. Whereas for me, the important thing is the fact that things are incredibly intricate. I mean, we know that from, whether it's how all the things in the biosphere work or how your body works, and everything is, it's intricate. And so, and besides, you can make a measurable definition of intricacy. So you could make it, okay, so I don't know if you do any, Howard Odum did a lot, he's a theoretical ecologist who did a lot of energy work in ecosystems, and he looked at, there's a succession of ecosystem forms. You go from grass to pine forest to oak forests, which are kind of supremacy. You can, each one of those are more intricately internally arranged in the sense that they circulate energy faster, and they circulate energy factor inside each organism
Mm-hmm.
than the other ones, and that's measurably so. So you could actually document. I have a slide of that same kind of intricacy that's measurable in terms of amount of energy circulating per unit time per unit density. Also can be used to measure the development or the intricacy of human systems. So there's a guy here in Tufts University in Harvard who has done what has done energy circulation speeds in human systems and marking civilizations.
So intricacy, does it also imply that it is resilient because of the multiple connections?
Well, okay, so intricacy is, well, okay, so I tend to see intricacy more as the fine grained, small grained stuff, which would be
Mm-hmm.
more resilient. But one of the things about fractals is it says that there's a balance between intricacy and efficiency, because you need the big guys as well as the little guys.
Oh yeah, no, that was on your slide.
Right.
Before I come to you, Tim, I'm just going to take this other question from Darren in the chat. With the S-curve of toppling cultures that you showed, I presume these were predominantly led by empires. Does the fact that the modern world is more led by smaller sovereign states, I'm not quite sure whether that's true myself, all chasing their own expansionism, which is true, make it more difficult / complex to topple and evolve this current global culture? I mean, we have effectively an American empire, which is in some trouble at the moment. But in terms of military bases, military expenditure, reach, power, it's obviously shouldering now with China and Russia and other countries. But how do you see that question?
What, that everything, that you have small empire builders as
Yes, in
well
other
as
words,
big
it's
ones?
more difficult, complex, topple and evolve the current global culture.
Well, okay. Every time you have, in every stage, there's a sort of a sorting out that goes on.
Okay.
So you start with lots of small guys. So let's take the automobile industry in America. In the very beginning, there were like 30 or 40 different automobile companies, but as the system gets more developed, they tend to concentrate down into a few, and that's just that's part of the getting more efficient kind of thing. All right,
Okay.
but um, but what? But I'm losing my mind. I'm having a senior moment. Pardon me. Um, in terms of the global economy now, I think it's going to, the internal pressures are building to an incredible state.
Yeah.
So yes, the small guys are all following the same oligarchic processes. And those for me, yes, the S curve that I'm talking about is basically is a result of oligarchy. So I don't believe that all hierarchies, or in the system science community, they call them heterarchies. So what we need to do is go from a rigid command and control militaristic type of hierarchy, where the guys on top have inordinate control over the guys on everybody below, and to a heterarchy where you have more distributed empowerment, because that's actually the way your body works. For instance, if you had to wait for your brain to make the decisions for your toes to move, you would never get anywhere, because it's too complicated and takes too much time. So bills is these distributed empowerment systems. So it's not just distributed in size. It's just, I mean, apparently the medieval Catholic Church worked on this too, subsidiarity.
I mean, I think the science is moving in that direction, obviously, and also sort of interconnected. And I've just been reading Irwin Laszlo's latest book today, which arrived yesterday, and it's an interesting content also from Kingsley Dennis, again about the evolution of the values and the importance of moving away from this top-down control to the more systems view. But of course, the people don't give power up unless they have to. And so there was this sort of dynamic as well.
No, but you see, I mean, okay, so when I lived in North Carolina, they had an interesting experience, which was, it's a very conservative state. And, oh, there you are, you moved. They passed a no homosexual marriage act. Okay. And the progressives in the state just were fighting it tooth and nail, fighting. And about 2 years later, nationally, they approved same-sex marriage. So I think a lot of what you see in terms of the big pushes of the hyper-conservatives, the far right, I think is the last desperate act, because they see they can't win elections anymore. So they're passing laws saying you can't vote, because if you vote, I won't get elected.
That's so interesting. I think this whole business of electability is a very interesting one, but we'll park that for the moment. And there's a question here, which I think you partly addressed, is Jackie Quealy saying that she thought your talk was meant to be energy-based worldview, but it was more entropy-based. Do you have a response?
Sorry, I try to mean,
No, I think what you said in the moment, just in the last few minutes, about the drivers involved in the energy, I think probably explicates that. So let's go on to the next question, which is, what's your view on UBI, Universal Basic Income? Do you think this is a game changer, or, I mean, some people approve and others don't. For instance, if you look at Richard Layard, who we had on the platform recently, he's not a universal basic income person, because he feels that people need to make some sort of effort in order to get a return, in inverted commas.
I think I have more of an issue with the language.
Yeah.
So I believe that you have to keep, in order for the system to be healthy, all the parts have to be healthy. All the people have to be healthy. And I see a lot of that as in terms of what I call connective tissue, which is, in this case, everybody needs to have essentially free access to food, water, shelter, energy, internet, healthcare, education. These are public goods that need to be fundamental, and once everybody has those, whether or not they have an additional basic income on top of that, that's kind of like too far for me to figure out. But I definitely think that it's those basic fundamentals, I don't know what you call it, a safety net or a fundamental level of well-being that all people have to have.
Yes, and I think the other thing which is very important, especially in relation to mental health, is that people need to feel they're making a valuable contribution. That they
exactly.
And
right.
that seems to me
Which,
even more important than I mean, obviously the money is important, but if we become over robotized and there's a lot of widespread loss of jobs, we then need to think very seriously about how we as a society are going to give individual people and communities a sense of being valued and useful.
see, that's why, I mean, I think the empowering education is such a big, important thing that is so often overlooked. And I did some work for an educational reform company, and I've been to some of those schools. It's astounding. I mean, they have on the board, they have like 10 commandments of collaborative culture. And there are
Okay.
things like, you know, um, let's see, I'm blanking on them. But anyway, but they have a few rules, and they use that as language for all decision making. And this is for not only the students, but the staff and the administration and everybody, the faculty, everybody has the same set of core guiding principles. And you go into these places and they start from a very early age, and you know, the kids are involved, they're excited, they're having fun, they're doing practical things. They set up these little micro businesses and law firms and monetary systems and judicial systems so that they get experience with how things work. And by the time they're in 8th grade, they are more sophisticated than most adults I know. Anyway.
Yes, that's very, actually today's book that arrived in the post is Transformative Learning, which is the new book of essays commemorating 30 years of Schumacher College.
Mm-hmm.
So Schumacher College is exactly an example of the kind of place that we're talking about. Could you say a little bit more about these common values?
Common cause values.
You went through their common cause values, because one of the things that I've come to appreciate in my work on character and values is that you really have to have a primacy of moral values over other kinds of value. Otherwise, you get these, government keeps on talking about resilience, but you can have resilient criminals and they're very resilient ones. And so resilience is a neutral quality, whereas goodness and honesty and integrity, which I think were among your values, these are key. Could you say a little bit more about that and how you see us developing a wider sense of these values?
I don't know if you've heard of her, but there was a Nobel Prize winner called Elinor Ostrom who won her prize for rules for governing commons. And
yes,
this was, again,
I have heard of her, but I'm not familiar with her work.
Well, okay. Part of what I think one of the things that's different, the reason I call them common cause, is because it's not just love. It's not just caring. Like, so that in order to get these things to work, you need to have, for instance, you need to have legal systems that have input from all people, and that where you don't have just excessively harsh penalties. You have to have rules like no freeloaders, because that creates dissension.
Yeah.
You have to, but you also have, basically what you're trying to do is get up a sense of fairness in the entire system, such that everybody is willing to go along with it, because even if they don't get their way right at this moment, they feel like it's going to happen sometime, because because the system is fair, essentially. In terms of common cause values, this educational reform company that I was talking about before, they had a whole long list of life skills, and they include things like perseverance and openness and a sense of humor and courage and they, these are things that almost anybody would agree with. But we need to sort of establish those as important things, and we also have to create institutions that allow them to happen, allow them to flourish. I mean,
yes, and I think, well, that's very much the what I've been working on in that part of my educational work, which is the virtues, the civic virtues, the intellectual virtues, the moral virtues, and then the performance virtues, which is what these qualities like resilience are. And you really need to develop them in all areas. and that's in order for them to be balanced. But you're right; we need a discourse and a widening awareness of this. And if you look at it's interesting, the curriculum for excellence in the Scottish education system is based on the qualities on the MACE, which is wisdom, justice, compassion, integrity.
Oh, I like
Those
it.
on the parliamentary MACE of Holyrood in Scotland. And I love the fact that that these moral values were put at the core of the political system. Whether that's actually working or not is another matter. But at least they're there, and they need to be made visible.
Absolutely.
I think is what you're saying there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just check and see what else we've got in the chat here. Yes, Judith Crichton talking about that we had Anne Kabagambi on Saturday, who works at the World Bank, calling for an international body for preparedness for the next pandemic and the next disruption is really what we were talking about. So there are these sort of initiatives going on, which is helpful. And what is it? Do you feel that is what makes you most hopeful? Because we really need a lot of hope at the moment. Our capacity for self-organization and coherence. Is that what makes you hopeful?
There's a movie here called Shakespeare in Love that won some prizes a while back. And what's his name? Jeffrey Rush? What's his name? I can't remember. Anyway, he plays one of the theater owners, and somebody's asking him, well, how is it all going to turn out? And he says, I don't know, but somehow it does. Frankly, that's actually the way I feel about it. I mean,
I do too. I mean, there's an absolute critical period where we could break down or break through or both.
Right. And the fact that I've seen all people in all these different fields already working on their piece of the puzzle is inspiring to me. And it does give me faith that it is happening.
So there is this great ordering oneness behind it all. I love that phrase.
That's Plato, by the way.
Is it? Great ordering oneness. Where does it come from? Can you remember?
Oh, no, I don't remember.
The Timaeus, probably. Which is more his kind of cosmological dialogue. Tuvi, nice to see you. What would you like to add here? You need to unmute. You're unmuted.
Okay, now I'm muted, okay. First of all, thank you, Sally, for excellent presentation. I agree with everything that you mentioned, but I want to mention both question points, because on the one hand, you're expecting that everything will happen, and maybe you help with your lecture, etc. But one of the problems today, there is advantage for all the large organizations because of the economy today. If you take Google or Facebook, etc., because they're large, they've got more control of the communication, they've got more control of the money, the influence become bigger and bigger. So I know that at the end of the day, according to your theory, all this will collapse because it's not be healthy, because there's no equilibrium, etc. But I believe also that we don't have to wait until this happens. We have to plan, because you start your background as an engineer. As an engineer, you have to plan something, to do something, and to see that it's working. So what I believe, that we have to not just think about the theory, which I agree with you, but from practical point of view, what as a society we can do to accelerate these changes. For example, what we can do is that all these organizations like Google and Facebook, which today, the main purpose is profit. And then you can see just few % of people have got more money and resources than all the 90% of the humanity. And they getting more and more. The situation today, they're getting more power and more money. So today, it's not working. So what we have to do in order to change this, the same with the political power, okay? So it's not so simple just to wait until we change. I think that we really have to plan what we have to do in order to create these changes.
Well, I completely agree with that, actually. I mean, like you say, I'm doing my piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
But I actually think that your piece of the puzzle is a pretty important one. Or in fact, it may be critical. And I think a lot of it is that we need to restore some of the laws that used to exist, like antitrust laws, because that's a terrible problem. But the other, and taxation, I mean, eliminating the inheritance tax allows concentration. I mean, heck, back to Napoleon tried to break things up by, limiting primogeniture and things like that, so that you didn't have this concentration that was passed on generation after generation. I think you need to create a sort of like a system of those kinds of practical economic and financial kinds of things that we need to implementing.
So which is really tipping the balance back away from the power of the corporate democratically representative people. But the trouble is that they're funded
both the politician on the one hand
by these
and also the information at this stage, most of
media,
it is controlled by these large organizations. So they've got much more power to influence other people. So you have to see how this, what you describe now, how this knowledge can be really spread, that people will understand how they have to, what each one of us can do in order to take control of our life and bring the change to the society. It's not so simple, but it's something that I think we plan together. In the SMN, for example, one of our purposes is really to try to expand, I think Tim asked this question, how we can expand the science, that the science today, it's a very good method, but there is still major things missing in science. Science, for example, don't include even the simple things that each one of us feel that you got some free will. The will, for example, intention, is not including in physics. And physics is, and then all the science is based on physics. But in physics, they don't even aware that there is something which is will or intention can influence movement. It's a part of energy, and it's not even recognized in the basic science. So we have to do some changes in many, many areas of life, and this is one of them, yes.
Which is really, it's expanding the paradigm, isn't it? Which is what
exactly.
We're doing, with the Galileo Commission.
Yes.
Jens has told us that Plotinus is the originator of the order.
Yes, I saw that go by. I'm sorry then.
No, and then this book that Linda Carroll is recommending, Oneness versus the 1%. It's an incredible book. I've read it, and I'm going to be reviewing it for the next issue. So I highly recommend that to everyone, and brilliantly written. Have you read that yet, Sally? Have you seen Oneness versus?
I have not.
Yeah, well, there you are. It's well worth.
I think I got the quote from a book on sacred geometries.
Okay. Good. Right. Well, I think we're winding up now. We've had an incredibly stimulating evening, fast-paced exposition, looking at really some essential patterns of thinking, self-organization, complexity, how change comes about, how this applies to our current situation, what we can do. And I think the network is in fact a self-organizing process in that way. And one of our vice presidents, who you must have known, is Brian Goodwin. I mean, obviously he died a number of years ago, but
oh yes, he was wonderful.
He was very interested in everything we've been talking about tonight. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed, for that brilliant and wide-ranging presentation. Everybody has really enjoyed it, enormously stimulated, and I hope that we can maybe continue the conversation, because and maybe feature an article by you in the the journal, and maybe you can join us informally on a Friday evening.
That would be lovely.
Too, because we have these more informal talks. So Andrew, thank you very much for your technical support. Thanks everyone for coming. So
and thank you, David, for all the work that you do and for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. It was a real pleasure. So good night, everyone. Lovely to see you all, and we'll see each other very soon. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.